Hello and welcome to Beginner Sketching with Royal and Langnickel's Art Instructor Series. My name is Mark Hufford. I'm a fine artist, art instructor, graphic designer, and fused glass painter. Although I work in many mediums with my artwork, my preference has always been sketching and drawing in graphite. I teach private drawing lessons, group workshops, and I also have many free tips and technique videos on my website at letstalkgraphite.com that are targeted to the beginner and intermediate sketch artists. I started drawing with a number 2 pencil and a piece of notebook paper at the age of 4 and have learned and developed many techniques and skills that help me increase my ability to convey a sense of realism and dimension to my work. I attribute that success and growth as a visual artist simply by learning how to observe and see things differently in the world around me. You will hear me refer to values in both the written and the video projects. So I want to explain first what I'm referring to. Everything we see in life is made up of lights and darks, shadows and highlights, shapes and contours. So we refer to all of those, that complete range of lights and darks, as values. Values are from the whitest white to the deepest black and every imaginable gray in between. When we look at a tree, for example, we don't see every single leaf and branch on the tree, so we don't want to attempt to sketch one as an artist. What we see are shades and value differences in those leaves that are attached to the end of each branch. Each one of those in itself has a shape to it. So as a sketch artist, we can learn to create a realistic work by recreating and matching that shape and to match the value that we're seeing versus trying to outline every leaf on the tree. I know you're really anxious to get started, but let's first review the cool tools and supplies that are included in your Royal and Langnickel Essentials Sketch Kit before I move on to the 2 projects. Let's take a closer look at your Royal and Langnickel sketch set. It comes in this really nice plastic container case to keep you organized. What we have here is a set of 12 graphite pencils. We have 3 charcoal pencils. We have charcoal sticks, graphite sticks, vine charcoal, a sanding block, a kneaded eraser, a white plastic eraser, a double-headed sharpener, and a blending stump. So let me go into a little more detail here. Graphite pencils are made up of a fine powdered form of graphite that's mixed with clay binders before it is encased in the wood handle. And the amount of binder or clay material added to that graphite determines how hard or soft the graphite is in that pencil. Each range of hardness level has a letter and number associated with it, and that indicates to you whether it's a hard pencil, a soft pencil, and how much graphite is going to be applied to the paper. So when we're looking at the H pencils, for an example, the 5H is going to be the hardest pencil that you have, which is going to give you the lightest value of graphite on your paper. The 6B is the softest lead pencil. It has less binder added, and that's going to give you the darkest or blackest. So when I started using graphite pencils with full ranges like this, I figured out this little tip. If you think of H as hard and light, B as soft and blendable or black. And that way you kind of can, get a feel for which pencil selection you'll need to use in your sketching projects. The charcoal pencils are soft, medium, and hard, very much the same as the graphite pencils. We have the really soft, the really hard, and then one that's right in between. And then the same numbers apply to your graphite sticks here. Now charcoal also comes in this stick form as well, and the charcoal is made up of burned wood, and that's typically the willow or tilia tree branches, and so this is its raw state. Then we have our sanding block, and it's important to keep your pencil lead sharpened. And so the sanding block is used for this just simply by taking that pencil and rotating it while you're moving it across the surface of that sandpaper to bring a point back. I use this when there's a lot of graphite still exposed on the pencil, but the point has been lost. If you don't need to go to the pencil sharpener until the lead itself is gone and you have more wood than you do on the graphite itself, that's when you need to use the pencil sharpener to bring this wood down a little bit. If you use the sanding block, you're going to find that you are going to extend the life of your pencils. As far as the erasers go, the kneaded eraser is exactly that. It's much like Play-Doh, and you can just work this. This is used for a lot of different lifting techniques and reductive drawing techniques that I'll be showing you a demonstration of shortly here. And then the plastic eraser, I call my start over eraser, because this will take your remove your graphite back to the paper's natural color, where you're not going to be able to achieve that necessarily with a kneaded eraser. And then we have our blending stump. Blending stump is used to blend transitions of your graphite that is rendered on the paper, and to help give a little punch and three-dimensional quality to your work in a sense of realistic way. And so I call this my magic wand. It's actually what I use to actually refine my drawings and bring them to that lifelike visual. Royal and Langnickel has a variety. Let me set this aside, and then we're going to go move on to some sketch pads here. Royal and Langnickel has several different types of sketch pads and sketchbooks. They come in pad form that you tear the sheet out. They come in a hardbound journal type, and then they come in a spiral bound. Now, what I always recommend that you keep a spiral bound on hand just to track your journey and your practice your techniques and whatnot in. And what I always recommend people do is to get a very inexpensive piece of poster board, cut that to one piece to fit each pad that you have. This protects the underlying layers. So if I give you an example here, if I take a hard pencil and I make some marks in this, let me remove that. If I make some marks in this very hard on my sketch pad, and then if I go to use this piece underneath, if I apply graphite to that area, you can see I've caused dents from the paper right here and here where I've done this little squiggle thing. And so if you put a piece of cardboard between your pieces, you won't damage that underlying paper. Also, good idea to go to the back of that sketchbook and make yourself a record of what each one of these pencils does and how far you can push it as far as how dark, how light, and a different stroke. So I would keep some kind of a journal or history of that, just so that you're able to practice your techniques and look to see which tool or instrument you should use. So that being said, we're going to demonstrate actually a couple of the pencil grip. I'd like to talk about pencil grip here. Most new artists tend to want to use their pencil in a utilitarian or writing manner. And so when we're doing the, when you're using that regular writing, like if I write my name, if I use that stroke, I'm going to press a lot harder than I really want to. And it's not saying you won't use this grip on the pencil when you get to do some fine little detail lines and whatnot in your drawings. But I like to use what I call an alternate writing grip, where I pull back on the pencil, pull back to the middle, and you want to practice just gliding your graphite back and forth. This is how we're going to be applying these in your projects. Just a slow back and forth motion. If I pull back even farther on the barrel of the pencil, I'm able to actually control just how light I'm applying that graphite. You can see there's a definite difference in the shade or value that we're talking about here. If I go up tight and close with that same pressure, it's actually much darker. So that would be you're going to use this writing approach for detailing. You're going to pull back for your general application of graphite and shading. And then when you need to lighten up on that and transition those values, you want to pull back and even further. The other grip that I use is the overhand. And when I use the overhand, it's typically to use that entire beveled edge of the graphite that's on the pencil. And that way I can cover more ground quicker. If I rotate this as I'm working, I'm actually sharpening the point on the pencil, so you want to keep that in mind too. You can use that sanding block, but you also can just use this while you're actually working your project. You can keep your pencil sharp by rotating the graphite as you're applying it. I will use this back and forth motion quite a bit when I'm wanting to block in, and block in means to rapidly fill in an area with your value. And then when I'm doing some closer work to shadows and whatnot, I'll use a little circular motion. And as long as you're overlapping that, you're going to have a consistent and continuous value that you're applying to that paper. So let's look at that blending stump again. Here again, this is where I can actually blend these two together very lightly. And usually you want to go the same direction that you did with your stroke. And if you do that, and like down here I was using the circular, I'm actually going to soften that even more. I can soften the edge right between those two and make there a transitional value between those. So you can apply these nice gradients to these dimensional shapes and objects that you're sketching. Let's look at the kneaded eraser again. If I were going to, let me grab a 6B here. I want to darken this value a little bit. And I'm going to show you the reductive drawing techniques. And this is reductive drawing. You can do an entire drawing like this, but you also can use this technique in your projects, which we'll actually be doing some reductive drawing in this when we lift our highlights back. And that's going to be just to shape your kneaded eraser. I actually could draw a drawing right in this. Right in this, I can draw like here's a glass. Reductive drawing technique. Just to kind of pull that back, I can switch to my hard eraser to get a really hard edge back to the paper, and then I can use a blending stump to bring some volume or shape to that. So if I use that eraser, I can use both of those in a reductive drawing technique where you actually can darken the whole page and lift back what your subject matter is going to be in very soft values. Okay, before we begin the two projects, the projects that you have included with your kit are going to be a cup and saucer and a teapot. But before we actually start these projects, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the observation skills that I had talked about previously. I usually work from a black and white photographs when I'm doing my drawings. And the reason that I do that is so that I can really look at those values, that complete range of white to black that I identify in each one of the subtleties within that subject matter. So I have a photographic print of the teacup and saucer, and I also have one of the teapot on photo paper. But I also have this printed on just regular paper. And the reason that I do that is I want to first start observing and looking at the shapes that each one of these values actually creates in order for that to become a realistic rendering or drawing of that subject or object. So when you're looking at your reference images, you start breaking down how many values you can identify in here. And so when this one jumps out to me right here, I usually just take a pencil and I will actually kind of draw the shape of that value. And so that section right here is one specific value, and then I try to match that elsewhere in the drawing so I know how I'm going to start applying graphite to my sketch when I get started. So if you look at everything and break it all down, we have a center of white in this area. I've got a white highlight here. I've got one reflected light there, and then it goes to dark. And there's that shadow coming back behind the cup is actually creating a shadow due to our light source beaming down here. It casts a shadow back here. Same thing here. We have light on the rim of the saucer, and so it's going to be dark underneath that surface of the bottom of the saucer. So you want to really pay close attention before you actually start a project and kind of get a visual of where these values lie within it. And this is what I'm talking about, observation skills. One of the tools that I do have on my website that's available for you to download for free is this reference chart. I've taken basically basic colors and then I've created those in a black and white grayscale so that when I'm looking at a color, I'm training my eye to see if that's the red, this is the value it is in black and white. If this lime green here, this is the value that it is in a black and white. So this helps you start training your eye to observe things a little differently. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take that outline drawing that we have provided here for you, and you're going to take your 6B pencil. And you're actually going to turn that upside down, and if you look here, you can actually see the lines through the printout. I want to take this 6B pencil, and I want to cover the entire surface using that palmed grip that we had talked about earlier, and I just want to blacken or rub that graphite on the back of that paper. What you're doing is creating yourself a graphite transfer paper. Now there are papers available. Royal & Langnickel does have graphite transfer paper available, and I use that often when I'm trying to get something very detailed. And so by doing this, rotate the pencil, remember, because then I'm keeping that lead sharp. Rotate, and I'm just lightly rubbing that on the back so that when I turn this over onto my drawing paper and I draw a line, I'm going to retrace those lines. You'll see I have transferred that onto my drawing paper. Now this is the board that I'm actually using. So the first thing I want to do is tape my my work, or the piece of paper that I'm actually going to use for my drawing. I want to tape that down to my hard surface drawing board. Just a little piece of, I'm using artist tape, but you can use a low tack masking. And then I want to center my outline, and I'm going to put just one more piece of tape up in the corner so that I can make sure that I'm not shifting that as I'm retracing my lines. So I'm going to use that 2H pencil. I'm going to come back here, and then I'm just going to start retracing the lines very lightly. Just make sure you hit all of these. You want to get all of your little highlight indications that are sketched in there as well, so you know where you're going to be actually lifting back a little bit. And so if you go ahead and get this portion done on both projects, then we'll continue with the actual application. See, I'm going to lift this back real quick and let you see. If you have this taped, you're not going to shift it if you missed a space. It's a good double check to kind of flip it back and forth. So go ahead and get that prepared, and then we'll get started on the project. Now that we've established and identified the values that are in our reference image, we want to move to the side of the edge of your paper, and you want to actually create yourself a value scale based on those observations that you made here. So we're going to be using the HB, 2B, and 6B pencils for this project. So out of those 3 pencils, I want you to take your pencil and holding it back on the edge, you want to just create yourself what that lightest value is, what the next value is that you see and identify in that reference image, and then switch the pencil to the 2B, and you want at least 2 values that you've identified with each one of your pencils being used for the project. And this gives you a visual reference during the process of what values you need to reinterpret based on your reference photograph. So I feel pretty comfortable with the fact that I have a whitest white here, I have my darkest dark down here, and then when I use the blending stump on these, it's actually going to help intensify those just a little bit. So what we want to do first is we want to start with the, once you've transferred it, you've already transferred, made your transfer paper, you have your image traced on, you want to take that 2B pencil and you want to just lightly you want to trace back over those lines, just to whatever you see that may have skipped a little bit when you've done your transfer, just to give yourself those harder reference lines again. Always have something under the palm of your hand, whether it's another piece of paper, tracing paper. I like using paper towels because it's soft enough and it kind of grips. Paper can slide, and that can actually help. That can actually smear your work as well. But your palm will definitely pick up the graphite and smear. So I'm using the regular, almost writing grip because we're doing detail lines. If I pulled back, I wouldn't have as much control, and I want to maintain the shape of my objects. So just very lightly re-identify some of those lines. And reposition your hand as needed. Another tip when you're doing straight lines or even curved lines, it works well for this. While you're drawing, if your eye is at least a ½ inch ahead of where you're actually going. So example, if I place my pencil here and I visualize where my end point is, if I keep my eye slightly ahead of where the pencil actually is and know where that destination point is, I'm going to have a straighter line. If I keep my eyes visually right where the pencil is, I'm going to tend to go offline a little bit. So that's just another little tip for you. Keep your eye slightly advanced where the pencil lead is. Be more accurate with your lines. And I do want to have those the reference for those highlights and shadows sketched in as well. So what you're doing is just retracing those lines. They don't have to be perfect because we're going to be blending some of this. Just lightly sketch those. Okay. And pay attention, very close attention to the shapes in your reference image. So always have that handy and always where you can make your observations. Turn your work as needed. That's one of the reasons I like to tape it down to a board of some kind. You can use masonite, you can use poster board. I'm using a piece of mat board. Whatever you have handy. You just want it to be mobile enough that you're able to actually move it around. Okay, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to start shading the inside edge of the cup, and we're going to be using the HB pencil for that. Because what we're doing is we're going to start building values. We are not going to start with intense blacks and start applying those, because if we need to lift them back, we've gotten too much graphite on the paper. You're not going to have that sense of realism and dimension. So you start by building them slowly and transitioning those to your darker values. So I'm going to use that palmed grip on the pencil about midway and placing the point down. I'm actually just going to lightly sketch lines following the contour of the cup, the inside. It's going to bow this way visually. And when I come down to this end, I'm going to actually follow the contour of the cup this direction. So we want to maintain the shape and visual three-dimensional appearance of the subject. And this can be fairly quick. You don't have to be very accurate with this because we're actually just laying a foundation of value based on our observations. Turn your hand in your work as needed. Here I'm using a circular motion just to fill in that little value there. If I tried using linear on this particular portion, I'm actually using ovalish shapes now and overlapping slightly. If you just do linear, you're going to lose the contour or shape. I just want to darken those areas that are a little bit darker. My shadow is pretty dark, so I want to block in a value there and bring it slowly around. accuracy on line is not important at this point. What's important is that you're just laying the values down. And so I'm looking at my reference image here. I probably want to turn my hand so that I can follow the shape of the cup here. Back and forth motions. I'm very lightly, I'm skimming the surface of the paper. I am not bearing down. If I were using this hold on the pencil, I'd be actually putting too many lines in the drawing and not actually applying value. So you want to just be very cautious about and conscious about the grip that you have on your pencil. We have a little bit of shadow coming in the handle here as well. Okay, now that that is done, we've used the HB pencil. We're going to come back just lightly, and we're going to shadow, or blend that value. We're just going to, in the same direction that we drew it, we want to seat or plant the blending stump and draw it that direction, lifting up as we go. So you can see how I'm starting to create this rounded dimension to the piece. Don't worry about going over the lines, because when we get to the close of the project, we're actually going to be lifting back and cleaning up with our eraser. So we've started with that HB pencil, which is a little bit harder than the 2B and 6B. So it's going to be a little less blendable, and we'll still see some of those characteristics and lines that we sketched in the completed piece because it's a less blendable graphite. There's more clay pigment added to that pencil than there is the 2B and 6B. We want to take that pencil again, and we just want to lightly shade, just long strokes, just kind of shade in the table a little bit. What we create is an environment. You want to create an environment for your objects or subject that you're drawing. You don't want it just hanging there in midair. Create an environment makes it look more realistic. And then we're going to just lightly blend that as well. Once we blended this portion, we want to use actually the sanding block, and we want to eliminate some of the graphite that we picked up on the blending stump, because that will actually, if you don't, what will happen is you actually can basically draw with it if you have too much on there. And we don't want to add more where we don't want it, so we want to sand that smooth. It removes some of that value or graphite from the stump itself. Okay, now we're going to move on to the 2B pencil, and we're going to start intensifying or darkening some of these values. And so again, you can use the alternative pencil, writing grip, or you can use the palmed method to do this. Due to the shapes and tightness of this, I am actually going to use that writing grip to start building some values here. But I'm pulling back on the barrel so that I don't actually bear down too heavily. So I want to start in the corner here. I want to bring a little more value into the corners of the cup. You see how this is starting to make it look really dimensional. I'm going to turn my work. So we're building values. Never start out with the blackest black. You want to build up to the blackest black where that is in your reference image. Let's get very dark underneath. And we're going to make that even darker yet when we come back with that 6B pencil. this edge is very dark, so we want to lay the pencil on its side. I'm rotating it as I'm going so that I keep that pencil point sharp. Remember that tip. Then we're going to go back to the blending stump again and just lightly transition that value. Just very soft. You don't need to bear down. If you bear down too hard on a blend with a blending stump, what you do is burnish the paper because you get a shiny spot. You'll never get graphite to go over that again. So you want to be very careful with your technique in your using the blending stump. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start darkening some of our lines with that 2B pencil and kind of redefining the shape a little bit again here. So it's a process. It's always a process of building up, redefining, because many times with that blending stump you are going to lose some of your edges, and you want to be able to maintain some of those. So I'm just re-identifying hard, darker edges. And then you want to take your pencil, that same pencil, and on either side of the line on the table surface, you want to draw another line. So we're actually going to give this table surface a little pattern to it. Make it look like woven fabric. Now that we've built the values up with the 2B pencil, this is where we're going to come back with the 6B, which is the softest pencil. Give me my darkest blacks. We're going to go ahead and start building these shadows even more, and then we'll take that blending stump back to it again. And so on my reference image, we do have that dark shadow here, and so I want to pull back on my pencil, and using a back and forth motion, even small circles, you want to deepen that shadow. We don't really want lines there. And you're just softening that lightly. Come back underneath where you have your darkest dark in the saucer and do the same thing. I'm not really lifting the pencil. I'm lightening up as I'm moving if I need to get into a tight area like right there. And I'm just moving the pencil back and forth. Just darkening those values a little bit. Rotate my work. I want to get this edge, darker edge on the side of the cup. I don't really like a lot of technique of lifting the pencil off the paper. It's easier when you're doing these value transitions to glide the pencil and skim over the surface, controlling your pressure, than it is to lift. If I lift when I pull, I'm going to end up with lines, and unless you are really conscious about following the shape of and contour of the subject, your lines can become wobbly and off a little bit. So I tend to like to use just that skimming back and forth motion to blend. And I'm going to palm the pencil a little bit here, and I want to give this a little more contour and shape. So I'm very softly gliding the beveled edge of the pencil around the cup. Build that value. Remember, our light source was coming in this direction, so this is the facet or area of the cup that's going to be in highlight. So we want that to remain fairly white. I want to actually kind of redefine some edges here again. And then we are going to use the blending stump very lightly again, and we're going to soften these edges just a little bit before we move on to some further detailing with that reductive drawing, which is lifting back of graphite that we've applied. So I'm going to go ahead and take my kneaded eraser. I'm going to put a point on it, and I want to lift back some highlights that I have identified in my reference image. And I know with the light source coming in that we do have a highlighted edge right on the rim of the saucer. So I'm going to lift back a little bit there. A little reflective light bouncing back from the table surface underneath. And then on this edge of the cup, we had a fairly strong highlight right there and one right about there. And so follow the contour of the shape of the cup as you're doing this. Just go back and just observe your reference. You see now we're starting to make this look like China just by lifting back a little bit. The final step in this drawing is going to be taking that hard eraser, and we want to clean up any edges that we may have blended out over our line, just to redefine the edge. Rotate your work as you need to. Just redefining that edge. With the the plastic eraser too, when you bear down on that, you'll see this residue that's going to be left on the paper. You don't want to use your hand, or you're going to you smear your graphite drawing. I use one of the Royal brushes and sweep that away gently. Just flick it right off the paper away from you. I'm just going to soften that just slightly there, the blending stump. See, I can follow the contour going one direction, but I can also follow it going the opposite direction. There's two directions to this curve. And the last thing you'll want to do is sign your work. And so I would just, in the bottom right-hand corner, go ahead and sign your work, and we will move on to project 2. What I want you to do is go ahead and transfer that image. Use that 6B pencil, create your transfer on the back of the outline drawing that's provided. Transfer that to your image and go ahead and tape your paper down to your working surface, and we'll be ready to start that project. Okay, we are now going to move on to project 2, which is the teapot. And you have already transferred your outline drawing using that 6B graphite pencil over on the top. Tape down, lifting up as you need to see if everything's transferring correctly. And then we also have our reference image handy. So what I have done to this point is bring it to redefining that outline with the HB pencil. And then the first thing I want to do, we're going to be using the 2H, HB, B, 2B, and 6B pencils on this project. So using our reference image, you want to go ahead and create yourself that value scale, again, on the margin of your paper. Try to identify values that we see here. When we're looking at the reference image, you can see these definite shapes in these reflections, and so you want to be able to communicate those, translate those on your paper surface by identifying those. How this the handle of the teapot lid is reflecting into the lid itself. The arch of this edge is coming back and shadowing that. So you want to look at all of these shapes that you're defining in here. There's almost this little happy smile here. This is a very subtle transition from this value to this value, and so you want to just make sure that in your initial outline drawing, you have transferred those lines that help determine where those values and how dark they're going to be. So create yourself that value scale on the edge of your paper, starting with your 2H, and then move on up to H and create that value scale and just to determine each one of those values that you're seeing in your reference image. So you should have at least those 6 pencils. We need to make sure that we've identified each one of those and determined a value that will be used for that. So the first thing then we're going to do once we start that, we're going to take that 2H pencil and we're actually going to start, let me move that out of the way here so I can turn my work as I need to. We are actually going to start blocking in some middle values here. And when we look at our reference image, nearly the entire piece is that. So I want to be able to use that pencil on that palmed method or that pulled back so that I'm not drawing lines. I want to actually shade in and block in that middle value that we're identifying. It doesn't make too much of a difference if you're covering up anything, because we are going to still go back and we're going to be using the erasers and some other technique here to pull back, but we want to lay a foundation down to begin with. And so I'm using a back and forth motion. I want to make sure that I am following the contour as closely as I can. This center point right in here is towards you, so you know it's going to flare backwards. You want to kind of, once you get to the center, you're going to be more straight across, but then when you start this transition back up, you want to have your shading going that direction. So pay attention to the contour and shape of the subject. And we're just blocking in value. Rotate the pencil as you're applying the value, because then you're keeping that pencil tip sharp. You're not going to have to use the sanding block or the pencil sharpener. Extend the life of your tools. Okay, then we're going to go back again and we're going to start finding that next value, and where those are, we're going to start laying that over again. We're going to be using the HB pencil. You're kind of making that transition of those two values. So we have a break here. You can see the visual between the two, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to be using that blending stump to transition those further. Circular motions overlapped help give you a consistent, continuous shade or value buildup. Remember, turn your work as you need to. Approach the angle from the right side. So just back and forth. When I get into a tight area, I'm using a little bit more circular motion. Now, deep inside the spout here, right on this edge, we have a this little tiny ellipse here, but it's dark in the middle because there's no light hitting it. So I will sometimes steady my pencil a little bit with one hand, just to make sure that I'm not losing the shape of that. We've got that where the bottom of the teapot sits on the table. It's going to be the darkest because there's no light hitting that. So we want to make sure we are recognizing that value that we see. Okay, we're going to move on to the blending stump now, and we're going to actually start smoothing out some of these values just lightly. Make sure that you have wiped off the tip of it from the previous project so that you're not applying more graphite, but rather just moving around what's there. Now the HB pencil will be movable on here. That 2H, the H, when you're dealing with those harder ones, remember, they're not going to be as blendable as the B pencils are going to be. So it is a graphite drawing, so we do want the characteristics to show. So blending all lines out of a drawing is a technique, and it would be considered more rendering than it is sketching. So I'm just softening these values just lightly before we start building up and making some of these darker. I want to switch to that B pencil, and I want to start redefining some of these lines again before we move on to shading the table. When you look at your reference photo, there are a couple of these hard edges that are really defined on the parts of the teapot. And again, if you keep your eye slightly ahead of where you're drawing to, you're going to have a much more accurate line than if you have your eye fixed on the place where your pencil is. That also applies to when you're using brushes in painting. Same thing. Keep your eye ahead of yourself. Have fixed in your mind where you're going. Visualize that, and you'll have a straighter line. More accurate, less wobbly. You want to darken that shadow in here. I'm just using a back and forth motion, not lifting the pencil. If I lift the pencil, I won't be able to maintain the shape because I won't be planting it back on the paper where I ended. So if you're very lightly skimming, you're able to create these shapes a little bit more accurately if you're not lifting your pencil off the paper. So I'm just darkening some of these values a little bit, creating more contour and shape. Right across here we had a little bit of a shape change between the bottom and the top, and then I'm going to actually just kind of very lightly with the side, I want to get that block in those square shapes that we had determined were reflections from the overhead lights when I shot this photograph. Okay, we can go on. Let's go ahead and shade the table now with that same pencil. Pull way back on the barrel. You'll get a much longer stroke and more consistent. And we're just back and forth motion. I'm rotating it to keep the point sharp, but not reducing the size of the pencil, having to go back and sharpen it. Then I want to kind of redefine the actual shadow this is casting. Now we have light coming down on it. It's going to flare out a shadow. If you look at the reference drawing, not the photograph, I did not put it in an environment in the reference photo because I wanted you to concentrate on each one of the shapes within the teapot. Take the reference drawing and look where I've placed that shadow, that cast shadow. And then we're going to grab that blending stump and come back and start softening these edges, just lightly, very lightly. I do need to add a little more value in here, this upper portion. So I'm just skimming over the surface with the side of my pencil. Don't ever want to use your fingers to blend. If you use your fingers to do blending, our fingers and our skin naturally has oils. You're going to end up transferring those oils to the paper, and then you're never going to get it to blend, and oil will resist any graphite application. So never use your fingers to do blending with. Always use a tool or instrument. I also, on occasion, I'll use a chamois cloth that I have from Royal & Langnickel. That comes in really handy for when I'm working larger pieces. I can cover more territory on the paper with a cloth, a chamois cloth. And so we want to turn the work. I'm going to go ahead and lightly soften the shadow underneath. Skimming over the surface gives you a little bit more fluid transitions in your values than if I actually try to just follow it like this and stroke the blending stump. I want a smooth transition. So I'm going to clean this off. You can use your kneaded eraser too. Just kind of put your blending stump inside to wipe off some of the graphite that's on there. So you have plenty of tools in this kit with multiple uses. So we want to continually blend that, get a nice soft transition there, and fade those two together. Okay, we want to switch now. We're going to go to our 6B pencil, and we want to deepen these values and create even more contrast in here. When creating contrast, you create this a deeper sense of dimensional quality or 3D look to your work. Contrast meaning black against white. It could be two grays against one another, but one is much darker. That's contrast. And so I want to really darken the shadow that's underneath here, but just to a point. I'm not taking it all the way because I want to blend that transition and soften that shadow. Again, this is the alternate writing grip that I have going on here right now, where I've pulled back on the barrel. I want to be a little bit more deliberate and precise in these darker values because if you look at your reference image, they have definite shapes to them. So you want to really pay close attention to that. I always recommend that if you're working with a color photograph, if you can go ahead and print that out in black and white, it's very helpful for you to build your observation skills. And so I'm just using that back and forth, skimming over the surface. Remember, this pencil, this 6B, is much darker, and it's a softer lead, a softer point on it. So it's going to apply the blackest black. It's going to be movable. We're going to be able to blend this color much easier than you are those H pencils. So you can set up, small still lifes. Try to start with just white objects. Try an all-white study of objects. Photograph that. Print that photograph out. And start looking at all those values that you see. Okay, I'm going to take the blending stump again, and I'm just going to soften some of this a little bit more down here in the shadow. Very softly. And then we're going to move to the erasers, and we're actually going to, this is just going to start popping the dimension is going to be built on this piece by lifting back that reductive drawing. Lightly blending. I'm going to take that 6B one more time here, and I'm going to redefine some of these harder edges, and I'm going to be choked up tight like I am when I'm writing. I'll tell you the sign of a true artist. That is a callus that I have built from this tight detail. You will end up with a callus here the more you draw, so don't let that concern you. That just shows that you are a creative person. You either do a lot of writing or a lot of drawing. You see this by darkening just a few of these lines. I'm actually adding a little more dimension and contrast to the drawing. It's going to be more dynamic than if everything were the same value. Just redefine some edges And then we're going to go move to the eraser. Okay, we're going to start, I think, with the kneaded eraser. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to just do a little bit of blotting. When you knead the eraser nice and soft, just lightly press, and you're just lifting back gently, and creating this nice transition between the two values when you do this. If I move back and forth, I'm going to create a hard edge. But by dabbing or blotting, I'm actually just softening a transition between those values. Softening that makes that a little more realistic. Then I'm going to shape it to a point, and we're going to lift back those brighter highlights that we see. When you look at your reference image here, you'll notice also that when light comes down and casts a shadow, light that hits this surface reflects back up on a shape of something. So we actually have a very little light line right where that meets the table. That light flashes back up and creates that reflective light. Then notice on the rim there's some very definite harsh whites. And we're going to use the plastic eraser to come back here and put those two little dots on that handle, or the handle of the lid. And then this edge actually works really good too to get a crisper white highlight. So use your kneaded eraser to blot and then create some of these highlights that you see. And then we're going to take that plastic eraser and we're cleaning up those edges again. Work from the outside, work in, rotate your work and clean up any of those areas that you have gone over. It's one good thing about graphite, you can always go back. If you haven't applied it too heavily and too dark to begin with, you can always go back, clean up your edges. Again, don't use your hand. Use a brush to whisk that away. Probably don't want to blow on it either. If you do, you can, for the lack of a better way of putting it, you can end up spitting on your work, and then it becomes pretty well useless at that point. You can damage a piece very quickly by blowing on it that way. So just go back and just look at those areas that might need a little more work. A little more refining. Add that pop of dimension. There we have our teapot project. So again, when you're finished with the project, go ahead and sign the bottom. So just to recap here, what we've done is we've learned a little bit more about our observation skills and trying to determine what the values are in our reference photos. We've created a value scale on the margin of our paper that is a continual visual reference to us as we're building up the values and following the shape and contour of your subject matter. In fact, this value scale, I will tell you, if any piece that I have sold that's matted and framed, if the owner actually takes the frame and mat off, they're going to see my study and my value scale on the side of my work here. So I hope that you were able to complete this piece. And one more spot here of cleaning up, I just noticed. So I hope you've enjoyed the projects and have a better understanding of the tools available to you in your Royal & Langnickel Essential Sketch Kit. Be sure to visit my website at letstalkgraphite.com for free tutorials, drawing information, and projects, and the opportunity to have video critiques done of your work as you start your journey as a visual artist. Enjoy the process, practice the techniques, and sketch on.